They're dead, Dave.
What, Captain Hollister?
Everybody's dead, Dave.
What, Todd Hunter? What, Selby? Not Jen.
He's dead, Dave. Everybody is dead. Everybody is dead, Dave.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Everybody's Dead, Dave, a Red Dwarf review podcast with me, Adam Martyn, my co-host, Phil Hawkins, and today we are joined by a very special guest. We are joined by Billy Garret-John. How's it going, Billy?
Wow, thank you very much. Lovely introduction. I'm doing very well, thank you, Adam, and thank you,
Excellent.
Phil, for inviting me on.
That's okay. I was saying this to you off air a second ago, but just for everyone listening, I knew I had to invite Billy on because he posted a picture of his bookshelves and he had every Red Dwarf DVD on there. So I was like, well, I've got to get him on.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm a big Red Dwarf fan, and I was saying as well to you guys before we started recording that this is really my first opportunity I've had to sort of publicly express my love for Red Dwarf or talk about an episode, you know.
No, wonderful. Well, from the sounds of that, it sounds like you're very much in a similar category to Phil in terms of Red Dwarf fandom. Because for anyone listening who is perhaps new to this podcast, Phil has been a fan of Red Dwarf since the 1990s. He's watched many of the series on first transmission, whereas when we started this, I had never seen an episode of Red Dwarf. I know I'm fighting to get my nerd card back as we speak. I'm working on it. So every episode we review is a first time for me. But I'm assuming, Billy, this isn't your first time. This is your umpteenth time, perhaps.
It's not my first rodeo. Yeah, no, I've been a massive Red Dwarf fan for years. I kind of came into it because of my love for Robot Wars, which Craig Charles obviously hosted.
Yeah.
And I just remember my dad coming back from the charity shop once, and he just said, "Look, there's something with Craig Charles' face on it. You like Robot Wars." And I think he also had watched a lot of Red Dwarf back in the day as well on first transmission. Read a couple of the books as well. I think he had the omnibus.
Ooh,
the big.
nice.
So yeah, like he just sort of gave me the VHS and I put it in. I was like, oh yeah, look, it's Craig Charles from Red Dwarf, from Robot Wars. And then suddenly it was Craig Charles from Red Dwarf. That was the most important thing in the world. So yeah, then I just absorbed as much of it as I could.
Can you remember when that
years.
was? Whenabouts was it you started watching it? Was it during the period that, I mean, we're all Doctor Who fans here as well.
Yeah.
So as Doctor Who fans, we understand the concept of the wilderness years. Red Dwarf has its own wilderness years.
It does.
About 10 years where there were no new series. Was it during that period? Or?
Yeah, it would have been. I think it would have been around 2004, 2005 that I first got into it. And that was through the VHSs. So the first things we owned, because we couldn't really afford like new DVDs, the first things we owned that were Red Dwarf related were like the old, they split the seasons into two.
Bite 1, Bite 2.
Bite 1, Bite 2, exactly. So my first one was the first bite or second bite with Quarantine on it from Series 4. Nice. And so that became like my favourite, and it still is my favourite episode of Red Dwarf. And then, kind of picked up other bits and bobs again at charity shops. And, so I didn't have a full viewing experience of Red Dwarf from the start, from Series 1 through everything else. It was all in bits and bobs. So it was like, oh, well, Holly was a girl last week in the episode that I watched on video. But now
he's a man.
Yeah, what's going on? This is a bit strange. So it was a nice introduction. It's kind of the way I think a lot of people experience those things that aren't on air anymore, like Doctor Who or Red Dwarf.
Yeah. I mean, in many ways, it was similar for me because I started in the sort of mid-90s and it was still on the air. So I caught sort of series, I think, 6 or 7 was the first one I caught as it was going out. But then I'd also caught loads on repeat and not necessarily in the right order. So it was very similar for me as well.
I don't know how people.
I'm sorry, Adam, go on. I was just going to say,
right.
I'm kind of impressed that Phil started maybe Series 6, 7, and decided to like carry on watching it. Like if you started at Series 7, I'd be like, not a chance. I'm checking out.
I don't think
show.
I had any concept that it was Series 7 at the time. It just came on the telly.
It was just on.
And it was just on. As linear TV was in those days. I had 4 channels, and it happened to be on, and I found it funny, so I watched more of it when I next saw it was on.
Ooh. That sounds very ominous for Series 7. Can't wait till I get to
I'm
there.
kind of surprised that Phil hasn't introduced you to the concept that Series 7 and 8 aren't actually that good compared to the
I've
other
heard
ones.
like through now various grapevines, like Phil says on like Facebook groups. I think I said in a previous episode, Phil, didn't I? I think people seem to think this one we're doing, Series 3, and I think Series 6 it was, people seem to be like, that's like peak Red Dwarf. And then, I think people have said like 7 and 8 are a bit wobbly.
Because I haven't seen those two series in years, so I'm looking forward to getting around to them again.
Yeah,
just
I
to see.
think there are positives to drag out of them, but I think it's just the general experience of watching it. It's not like classic Red Dwarf in much the same way that people look at the Dave era now, and you could compare that with the new series of Doctor Who and the classic series of Doctor Who. Going, it doesn't quite feel that, it's missing something.
No, absolutely. Well, we are still listeners in Series 3. We're looking at Episode 4 today, which is Bodyswap, which originally went out on the 5th of December 1989. And the plot synopsis is, Rimmer suggests that the perfect way to help Lister get healthy is by swapping bodies, by implanting his mind into Lister's and vice versa, so that Rimmer can undergo a hefty exercise regime in Lister's body. However, Rimmer is overtaken with excitement at the prospect of having a physical body again and refuses to give it back to Lister. That is your plot synopsis. So, Bodyswap, gents. If you don't, I just want to quickly say, the theme tune to Red Dwarf, I do love it. I love it, and Phil's heard this a few times now. But Billy, do you remember in Series 1 and 2, the intro wasn't necessarily that theme. It was like, well, it was the theme, but like that very slow...
Yeah, it was more of a sort of space opera, sort of Star Trek sort of epic thing, yeah.
I've got to admit, I still low-key, I think I preferred that at the minute. Maybe it's because I'm watching them in order for the first time, but there was something I really loved about that slow, like, panning with the music building. I don't know what it is. Like, I love the Red Dwarf theme in this series is great. It's brilliant, but yeah, I think I'm holding on to that first version. I don't know about you two, but
do you know? I think the reason that, I think that theme tune sort of sits in with the original concept of it being a bit more bereft. The show, I think like people, marooned and deserted in deep space. That kind of pressing weight of the universe. And so the theme kind of works for that in the first two seasons. But then from Series 3 onwards, and I think Rob and Doug both put it down to watching Cheers for the first time. They're like, right, there needs to be way more jokes. Let's make this a sitcom. And then the theme song for Series 3 onwards is like, it's a sitcom in space.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think we've said this before, but it becomes a bit more of a action-adventure series from Series 3 onwards. Whereas before, it was very much it's how these two people are coping with each other.
Exactly,
in a confined space.
Less of a human sort of melodrama, and all those sequences on the observation deck, and all those other kind of like quite personal moments sort of filter away as you get through the seasons.
Yeah, we love a good observation deck.
Beautiful.
On this podcast.
Absolutely, and it's funny you mention about it becoming more like sort of comedic based and action adventure, because I wrote that the first few minutes of this episode where you've got the scutter that's gone mad and it's rewired everything, and I noted Rimmer and Cat in particular, the tone, even before the auto-destruct thing happens, the tone feels very somber. Like Rimmer and Cat for some reason feel very somber, and I don't know if that was maybe like the direction, but compared to normal, I mean, what Cat's like normally, he's like full of life, twizzling everywhere, but even when he's walking with Lister to the snack machine, he just seemed very somber compared to
I think I know why that is.
Okay.
Especially in the studio sequences. I can't attest to why Danny was maybe feeling a bit morose on the studio bits, but on the location bits, maybe he'd been out with Craig the night before or something. I mean, they were filming in Manchester and the Hacienda was still open, so
yeah.
But I think the reason why that first scene, and I think quite a few scenes sort of later on in this episode feel quite weighty, is because there's no studio audience. Because of the complexities of doing the dubbed lines.
Yes.
It wasn't shot in front of a studio audience, so the audience reactions are legit, but they were recorded after screening it to a room full of fans.
Right, okay.
And so I think the energy levels, and this is one of my main kind of criticisms with this story, the energy levels in certain performances, whereas they would have gone from like a 9 to a 10 if the audience were in the room, it kind of lifts the atmosphere and gives it a bit more energy. I kind of feel like because that isn't there, the whole episode feels a bit deflated.
I think you're right. I was going to say a very similar thing, and that really does explain it, because I was going to mention it about Craig Charles's performance. It just felt like a little bit like he was having a bit of an off day, slightly felt like he was phoning it in a little bit. But
Yeah.
that might explain a lot if they don't, because a lot of shows like that, and you feed a lot off the audience reaction, and like you're saying, that builds you up, and if they didn't have that in the studio, that makes a lot of sense.
I think that observation of Craig especially I picked up on because, and I don't know if it's because there's no audience and he likes an audience. You see it on the Smeg Ups, he's always playing to the crowd and telling jokes and stuff. I think that it's also being across from Chris, who is by trade an amazing mimic. Now I know obviously all of the stuff is ADR'd on afterwards when they share each other's lines and each other's voices, but there is a particularly obvious rift between the quality of the mimicry in terms of Chris kind of slouches his shoulders forward a bit when Lister's in his body, whereas Craig just sort of is Craig Charles or is playing Lister physically. He doesn't really do an awful lot to alter his stance or his facial expressions.
I think once he got the uniform on, though, that did change a little bit. Once he got the uniform, once he got Rimmer's uniform on, he was kind of standing up a bit more straighter. He kind of had that sort of smug look on his face. He felt a bit more like Rimmer there. But I do, especially in those early scenes, I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's even like like you say with the lip sync as well, because as soon as I can't remember the previous episode in particular, but in a previous episode we've seen Chris Barry impersonate different characters vocally, and he gives a pretty, I mean, me and Phil commented he did a pretty bang up job of Lister's voice and Holly, everyone's voice really. And the first time you see him lip sync, or mimic Lister, like the way the lips with the audio, like it's spot on, and the physicality, like you say. Whereas with Craig, it's mostly spot on. But I think once you say, oh, it's pretty accurate, there's a few moments where it isn't as accurate, and it just becomes, like you say, a bit more noticeable in a way. It's nothing against Craig Charles, like you say. It's a very difficult art to do as well. But I know what you mean about there being a rift and like seeing it, I suppose. Yeah.
I think that I don't know the technicalities of how it was done, but I kind of get the impression that maybe it was just shot live and then they dubbed afterwards. Which obviously makes way more sense. So of course it was that way. Why did I say that? Anyway, I think that one of the issues is that Craig's speech pattern is just a lot more faster because he's a lot more kind of his energy levels are a bit higher, whereas Chris. He's measured. He takes his time with what he wants to say and all that sort of stuff. I think that Chris is having a problem getting all of his words in when all that dialogue's coming out of Lister's mouth. Yeah. Craig's, oh my god, this is going to be so confusing now, trying to differentiate between who's actually acting and who's doing the voice. So what I'm trying to say is it's Craig, but obviously Chris is dubbing over him. But Craig speaks very fast, so Chris is struggling to get all of his dialogue.
And I suppose that would be also the opposite problem the other way around, whereas Chris Barry would have been sort of slower in his speech, and then so Craig would have had to have forcibly slowed himself down from how he would the sort of speed he would normally speak to try and fit it in right. So because all of those scenes where they did the voice swapping, it just jarred so much for me that it was really slightly off-putting, and I get what they were going for, but I don't know if it worked for me.
For sure. Yeah, just for a little bit of context, I'm sure some of you have seen this, but after the ship is about to blow up and they save it by using the body swap with an authorized member of the crew, afterwards Rimmer is basically giving Lister a bit of a hard time about his health. He eats a lot of bad food, he smokes,
I just thought,
I'm
going to interrupt you because you've just made me remember something I was going to say about that bit where they get the higher up person to try and abort the self-destruct. It was a shame we didn't get to hear Captain Hollister's voice.
That'd be great.
I don't know why they didn't, I don't know if just the actor wasn't available or what, but that was a shame. But also, I was slightly confused about why, if they have the holographic discs, do they have to do a body swap? Can't they just turn the hologram on?
Yeah, I guess the problem is the Crimson Short one up there can only sustain one hologram.
Oh, okay.
So
yes, of course.
I think, they'd be in it, because that's the whole kind of issue with bringing Kachansky back on disc, is they can only be one hologram.
Yes.
But I noticed another kind of thing with that, where Holly is, Holly's Holly, fine, she gets stuff wrong, she's, got an IQ of 6,000 car park attendants or whatever. And it's so she says that it will override the self-destruct, and then Officer Brown through Lister says the code and it doesn't work. And it's like, what? Why didn't it work? There's no explanation as because Holly even says Brown's got clearance to abort self-destruct.
Yeah,
and then the voice
does.
happens and it doesn't work. Maybe it's because it's not using her vocal cords. I don't know, but like some kind of explanation would have been quite...
Yeah, or the scutters had rewired another bit that meant...
yes,
work,
anything.
or...
But it just seemed a bit weird that it just didn't work, just to kind of have an admittedly fantastic gag where, you know, you've got the milkshake and the
that was brilliant.
crispy
I
bar
didn't see that
dispensing
coming
at the end.
at
Crisp.
all.
Great, isn't it?
It was just so good. Yeah, like, and you're right though about the whole no explanation. And I've noticed, obviously, going through this for the first time, there's a few of these red dwarfisms, I call them, like either little small things that either don't get, you know, elaborated on or get forgotten about. And I get it. It's a sitcom. You know, there's not as much emphasis on remember it or like filling in those gaps maybe as like a straight sci-fi drama. The one I always mention now is the one at the start of this series. Phil knows what I'm talking about. Where, you know, you're introduced to a female Holly, lots of different changes, and you've got the Star Wars scroll going at 1,000 miles an hour. Foolishly, Billy, I didn't read it because I thought it was a joke. I thought you weren't meant to read it.
Yeah, well, exactly.
That's how it's like played off, though, isn't it?
But
Exactly,
in the
but
90s,
apparently
nobody
it's all
would have been able
described.
to read it. Because
Exactly,
even
yeah,
if somebody had recorded it on VHS, if you'd paused it, it would have been all fuzzy with loads of lines across it, as VHS was. So they did it knowing that nobody would read it, but maybe one day somebody would be able to pause it perfectly.
And
read
it kind
like,
of doesn't, but definitely doesn't explain why everything's so different now.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We let it slide. But after that crisis averted, Rimmer has a go at Lister. You know, he's not healthy. He eats awfully, drinks a lot, smokes a lot. Suggests that if he was in his body, he'd get him on a health regime. He'd make him feel better. And Lister's a bit, you know, he's not convinced at first, but after a lot of pestering from Rimmer, he's like, yeah, let's do it. And so we have the first instance of the two body swapping, and we get a few gags, you know, about them being in each other's bodies. We've already talked a bit about the lip sync from the pair of them. But the first scene in particular that springs to mind is with Rimmer with his banquet from Crichton. So what do we think about that scene?
I think it's lovely. I think if you had lost that sensation of like touch and eating things, that you would go mental, wouldn't you? You would just have the biggest pile of food possible and throw yourself into it, and you just go a bit crazy. I think that everybody would be in that kind of scenario. So it's quite cathartic to watch somebody throw their face into a plate full of mashed potato. I thought it was great. I like the fact that that Lister's diet is being called up, because it's like he's got an atrocious diet. I mean, in this episode alone, we get Kipper's Vindaloo as a delicacy. We've got the triple fried egg sandwich with chili sauce and chutney from before.
Yes.
The Shami Kebab Diablo. Nobody explains what the hell that is. A beer milkshake, and then the sugar puff sandwiches. Obviously, they go down in history. But I think it's cool that somebody's just gone. I mean, he's joked. He talks about eating curries all the time, but let's see some consequences for all this stuff.
Yeah. No, that's it. Yeah. What about you, Phil?
Yeah, it was a funny scene, and you know, they really obviously overemphasized everything, like the mashed potato with like, I can't remember what the line was, but something like quadruple cream and ridiculous amounts of milk and butter and stuff in it. Yeah, it worked really well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, being Rimmer, he orders like some trout dish which has a really fancy name, because he wants to seem posh as well.
One thing that sprung out to me that Rimmer does in Lister's body, like you say, gotta get that correct, is he gets rid of the dreadlocks, which feels like the end of a Red Dwarf era, because of course he's had, well, for me again, going through from the beginning, he's had them from day one, and
it's great. It almost feels like that should be a series finale moment. Lister gets rid of his dreads, you know. And also, I didn't notice on the first rewatch, because I actually watched this twice. I watched the transmission version and I watched the remastered version as well, with a couple of added bits and bobs. Well, one added bit and bob. And there's a really lovely bit, it's in both versions, but I didn't notice it the first time, where when Lister's all bandaged up in his bunk, he's got a bit of elastic around his dreads and he's stuck his dreads back to his head with like a bit of string over his thing. I hadn't noticed that before. I thought it was a really nice touch that he was trying to get back to being normal again.
Yeah, I wonder if they'll have miraculously fully regrown by next episode.
I wonder.
Oh, is that okay? Right. I've said this to Phil a few times. Things happen like that, and I go, "Oh, I'd love this to be a continue." He's like, "Adam, no, you should know by now. We're 3 series in. If you think something's going to continue, it probably isn't."
That's so funny.
And then they'll randomly continue some really obscure thing that was mentioned like 3 seasons ago.
Exactly, like, that monster that was good one week, let's bring it back like 2 or 3 seasons later. Like, why not? It's great, yeah.
That's what I love about the show, though. You can get away with it because it's a comedy as well.
I must admit, though, throughout all this shenanigans so far, well, I guess I'll say first, after Lister catches Rimmer feasting when he shouldn't be, he's like, right, want my body back, and it happens. And Rimmer's, begging and begging and begging. He's like, come on, let me do it. And Rimmer, see, I'm doing it now. I'm getting and Lister goes, no way. Then Rimmer gets Crichton to chloroform him and do it against his will. And again, I know it's a sitcom. I know it's a comedy. And I was like, it's a comedy, Adam, let it fly. But, like, Rimmer's kind of a dick in this. Like, more than you... Like, I think I said before... Oh, sorry about the bad word. Rimmer's not a very nice person. He's... Because I think me and Phil have said before, he's like that in many episodes. He's got that air about him, that self-arrogance, the pomposity sort of thing. But it's always usually endearing. It's what you sort of love him for, that sort of snarkiness. But I don't know. I just feel this one, I couldn't get behind it in the same way. Even when I'm like, oh, it's a comedy. But it's just, I don't know. It's just,
I totally agree with you, Adam. I actually noted down that in every kind of, Rimmer caper where he does something wrong that kind of screws everybody over, you always get the impression that eventually he'll see sense, and he'll kind of come round to what he's done and he'll help the crew out and realise he is a smeghead or whatever. But in this scenario, I can genuinely just see him flying off with Lister's body and not coming back. Like, like he's lost this sensation, and it's the kind of key kind of all the human sensations he's been left without for years, and now he's finally got them all back, and somebody wants to take it away from him again. It's like, no, of course he isn't. He's going to do everything it takes to keep that sensation, no matter how bad it is. And I'm not sort of agreeing with him in that instance, but I can see that this would be the one he just absolutely loses it with.
Yeah. No, yeah, I did write that. I do understand like why he's doing it, but yeah, the whole way he goes a bit. The first time obviously was consensual because obviously Lister agreed to it. Of course. I think it's just, I know it was it was made a long time. It was 1989, a long time ago. But I just think the whole notion of like chloroforming someone to do something that they haven't agreed to. And again, I know people might say, I know it's a comedy. I know it was made a long, but for me, it just was a bit like bit of a clenched teeth, red flaggy thing, but that's just me.
There's been a few things since we started going through it that have been like, oh, don't know if we would do that now, even in a show like this, because like it just feels a bit. I don't know what the word is. Help me out. What's the word I'm looking for?
I guess by comparison, it's probably just a bit inappropriate, or it just it's. I think the trouble is, especially when you're talking about a science fiction series and a comedy show, is that there is obviously that suspension of disbelief, and you're going into it signing up for the fact it's a caper set in space. So you're going to see monsters and weird things or whatever. But yeah, I think sometimes there are moments like that where it is just slightly too real. There is a chloroform thing in a later episode. It's not as egregious as this, but I think it's I've just got an image of Crichton chloroforming somebody else kind of later on.
That's not Series 8, is it? Because there's some dodgy stuff in Series 8.
No, it's not. It's not Crichton perving on.
It's not Crichton TV.
It's not Crichton TV. You've got that to enjoy, Adam.
Yeah, we won't tell you. We won't tell you anymore. But
I think it's like a series. I think it's Quarantine. I think it might be. To chloroform somebody to knock him out. I can't remember. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, great! Can't wait till I get to that. Yeah, I think, and because I mentioned like later on, he gets his body back again, and then eventually takes off in Starbug and buggers off, and basically says, "I like your body. I'm gonna keep it for an extended period. Soz, love you. See you later. Bye." And I did find that funny. Like the whole message was funny. But again, I just think, and some people might think I'm reading it too serious. It's just the way I interpret it, I just think as soon as because it stemmed from the whole chloroforming thing. Like, even though I found it funny, I felt I probably would have found this funnier had the circumstance been played out differently. But again, I don't know what you two thought, but that was my reaction to the message.
Actually, that's the first time I didn't think of it when I watched it. That's a bit iffy, but just hearing somebody else voicing a concern about it, it's like, oh, actually, do you know what? It is, again, it's a non-consensual sort of thing, isn't it? So yeah,
and you could see Crichton was very torn up about it. He did, it's his programming making him obey the commands, but he really didn't want to be doing it. Which did, his reaction, I did find very amusing, like the way his guilt comes across, and the way when he's doing stuff that he doesn't particularly want to be doing, the sort of physicality of Robert Llewellyn there, he just does it brilliantly, and so that it's not that it was all bad. There was some good out in those scenes as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah, there was some. Even right, I'll get it right. Rimmer in Lister's body. That's correct. When he's in the ship, doing his little conductor thing, I thought that was really cute.
Ah, yeah, that was cool. He's going on a joyride in Lister's body while eating cream donuts. It's just such a bizarre sort of like visual. Also, so obviously the big chase kind of happens now. Between Blue Midget and Starbug, which I think is referred to as White Midget. They get the line wrong in the previous scene.
Well, I was looking on the IMDb about this. Apparently, because under the trivia section, it says that it was scripted as White Midget because they were planning on introducing a new, smaller version of the Blue Midget that would be the White Midget. But then they went with creating Starbug instead, but they didn't change the script. So they said White Midget. And in some versions, it's just dubbed over as the Midget. But obviously not in the version we watched.
Yeah, I mean, in the version I watched on Netflix, that had the Midget as the subtitle.
That's the one
which was a bit strange. But yeah, that obviously leads on to the model sequence, that great chase over the planet's surface, over that that planetoid or whatever, which looks great. And there's a couple of repeated shots here and there, but it's the first kind of complicated model shot of that type in Red Dwarf. And it looks pretty good, I have to say. However, the remastered version is CG and it looks awful.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, they replaced that entire model sequence with the same sort of effects you get in Series 7, Starbug flying into like a planetoid and then through these caves. And then it isn't like, oh, he hits something and then diverts down into the ground. It's just Lister just pilots himself, or Rimmer pilots himself into a wall. And then you've got this awful smouldering CGI Starbug. And
we've been saying since the very start that the model work on this show is absolutely phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
And it just doesn't date in the same way that CGI from the same era does. CGI dates so badly, and this model work doesn't. So it's a shame that they did it with the CGI.
Yeah. I've said to Phil before, like, obviously these early series, like you say, it's all model work as opposed to CG, but knowing just how technology changed and like the CG boom of the 90s, like I am dreading slightly when we get to the latest, because I know, like, it is going to be CG as opposed to, and I'm sure maybe in like the Dave era, for example, I haven't seen that, maybe it's got to a point where it's CG, but it's at least very good CG or like refined CG. But just how you described it there, as soon as you said, oh, they added CG on, I was like, oh
yeah,
no,
it's like, I think still when you're getting into sort of Series 6, the digital effects, the video effects look quite good. Like when Rimmer beams in, when he's sort of generated in the first episode of Series 6, all those visual effects still look quite good. But when they decide to replace the models for CGI in Series 6 and 7, it's just like can't believe it. What are they doing?
Yeah. It's such a fine line, isn't it? Because I think when you're adding CG to things, I'm not against the practice as like an alternative, but I just think you have to strike that. It's like the Star Wars argument, isn't it? You've got to make it feel seamless. Whereas, well, some of the CGI I think in the Star Wars original trilogy does work quite well with the 77 stuff, but then some others don't. Same, or like on some of the classic Doctor Who ones when they add. I like it as an optional extra, but sometimes there are some sequences I'm like, oh, that feels a bit too modern or a bit too out of place, whatever. So I guess it's the same in these Red Dwarf. But if the whole thing's CG, and if you say it's not even
it wasn't
CG,
very good. No, it's on Daily Motion. If anybody wants to watch the remastered version of it, it is
yes,
available.
Daily Motion still exists.
It does,
so
unbelievably. It's not been taken down yet.
When it crashed, when they crashed the ship, the Rimmer crashes the ship, and then they board, and they find him okay, but he does come out looking like he's lost an arm, and at that point, I genuinely believed it, because it made me think of Future Echoes, where Lister has a metal arm, and I thought, oh god, I can't remember this. Even though I've watched all of the series before, I genuinely didn't realise at that point. I was like, I started to question myself, and did he lose his arm here? I can't remember. He's definitely got a metal arm in the future, according to Future Echoes. Did that fool anybody else, or was it just me?
Adam?
I as a first time viewer, for like the first 10 seconds or so, I did believe it, because it is Red Dwarf and anything can happen. But as the joke as it sort of kept going, I thought, hang on a minute, and then obviously you get the reveal where he just sticks his middle fingers up at him, and again, like it was funny to a degree, but again, I just think because Rimmer's been so horrible in this episode, it's that thing of I didn't laugh as much as I could have done, because I was like, no, you don't deserve my laughter. You've acted absolutely horribly and without remote. Do you know what I mean? That was just me anyway. Like, it was, yeah.
I mean, when I was younger, the first time I watched it, I was certainly like, oh my god, he's lost an arm, and I forgot about the gag until this time, until he appeared, and then I was like, oh well, it's a fake out. I can remember him, doing the V's and stuff. But it was funny watching the remastered version, because when he first emerges with his arm missing in the remastered version, there's like nothing from the audience. They cut the laugh out, because there's kind of like an awkward laugh from the audience when they first see that he's got an arm missing, and it's kind of like, oh okay, it's all right, he'll be all right. It's just weird seeing him without an arm. But yeah, in the remastered version, they cut the laugh, which is really strange. So obviously, when they recut it, they were like, we want this bit to have more impact. Like, oh my god, Lister's lost his arm. So I guess, Phil, they may have been erring in that direction of calling back to Future Echoes, and it's like, even though with the events of Future Echoes that have happened, because the whole timeline's gone a bit wibbly.
Yeah, well, he doesn't have his kids with him anymore, which
no, exactly.
Future Echoes would have
we've forgotten about them. So.
Yeah.
They're one of the things they dealt with in that fast-scrolling Star Wars scroll.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he sent them back to their original dimension that their mum is from, or dad, or whatever.
Quick explanation, we love it. And when they all get back to Red Dwarf, all seems, everything seems back to normal, except well, it isn't really, because Cat comes in and no, sorry, I got that wrong. Rimmer. You see how difficult it is? Rimmer comes in, body of Rimmer, and he starts talking like Cat, because Rimmer has clearly not learnt his lesson, and he's just going to be extra horrible, and he's just swapped with Cat, who then promptly delves right into his food, just like before, and the credits roll. So, I mean, what do we all think of the ending? Do you think it's a good ending, or?
It's all right. I mean, it's one of those where you're kind of like, okay, he's not learned his lesson. Crazy old Rimmer. And it's like, that's the end. It's like, oh, we're not going to learn anything from what's happened here today. No, I don't. No one's actually going to take anything away.
Sure.
Again, like another kind of weird thing between the original and the remastered one. This is the only bit that I think they added original footage from. Is that bit goes out for a couple of seconds longer in the remastered version, so you can actually see the Cat pull up some chicken drumsticks, and he puts 2 beef burgers in front of his face for eyes. And it's kind of, it does change the tone of that scene a little bit, because it kind of goes from, okay, big crescendo, the episode's over, to big crescendo, wasn't that really silly and daft, because now I'm playing with my food and being weird.
Yeah.
It's a weird one. I think, there's tonal inconsistencies in this story, which are really only coming to the forefront of my mind, hearing you guys talk about your kind of, experiences with it.
Yeah, I mean, I know Phil's heard me before say some of the endings, because, a lot of the endings do just, as Phil said before, they just happen. There's no, like, like you say, there's no like, here's what we learnt today, which is fine. You know, it's just like, here's the ending, boom, done, which is fine. But yeah, I still find those even 3 series in sometimes a little bit jarring, even for a comedy. I feel I just wanted, I guess, maybe something a bit more to close it off, or at least some reassurance from Rimmer that he's not going to do that again, because it's really awful.
It felt like it needed Rimmer to have some kind of comeuppance, so that the gag, the laugh was on him at the end, so that we were laughing at him at the end, as opposed to laughing, oh look, he's done it again.
Yeah, knee slap. Oh, that like you say, Billy. Oh, that Rimmer, he's at it again.
It's really strange. But then I guess, are we viewing this in a kind of episodic, these characters grow and develop kind of way, or are we viewing it in that kind of, oh, it's a different caper every week? It's kind of like everything goes back in the box. How much time has passed between these 2 stories? We don't know. It's just like a massive reset at the start of every episode. The status quo has just returned to normal.
Red Dwarf kind of sits in the middle of those 2, really, doesn't it? Because sometimes it will completely reset and everybody's back to status quo the next episode, and sometimes they have character development and things do change. So it's always a bit of a guessing game. Like, what are they going to do this week? Is this going to stick? Who knows?
It's a very weird one to straddle, isn't it? Like you say, it's almost like having your cake and eating it, which they have done really well sometimes. I'm not saying it can't be done, but yeah, it's hard to strike, as you say, that balance between, are we resetting completely? Oh no, but we're carrying some little things over. But that, yeah, it's a bit of a mix-up. But that, in essence, is the episode Bodyswap. I mean, you've heard listeners' our thoughts on it. There's quite a few ups, quite a few downs as well. So I think, first and foremost, let's talk about our funniest moments or funniest scenes in this episode. So, Billy, as our guest, did you have a particular funniest moment? Or
I do. I mean, there's 2 scenes that really stand out to me. One, which is a classic. I think it's a stone cold classic Red Dwarf scene, which is Lister and the cat playing Scrabble. And just
joysticks.
That is just brilliant. That is such a great scene. And it kind of reminded me that even in episodes that are a bit middling or a bit meh of Red Dwarf, you can guarantee the cat is going to give you at least one good belly laugh per episode. So that was good. And I also, another cat moment, Danny John Jules really kind of stole certain scenes for me, is when Crichton first hands over the tape with Lister's mind on it. And there's that beautiful bit of comic timing just where Danny just looks to, I think Rimmer's next to him, and he just perfectly drops it into his cup of tea in front of him. And there's actually, if you look really, really closely, just before that shot cuts, you can see Craig corpsing.
Oh, really?
And there's a smirk on his face because he's pulling that kind of, like vacant sort of expression.
Yeah.
And yeah, that he there's a very slight moment where he kind of corpses there. But yeah, those are my 2 kind of big moments.
I might go back and rewatch. I want to see where he corpses. But no, that did make me belly laugh. That, I'd say, that comic timing was absolutely spot on. Phil, what about yourself?
I put it down as the girdle scene. When they're leading it, and the lead up to it, just that he can't. Again, it's tricky to. Rimmer in Lister's body comes in a bathrobe, and Lister's like, "What are you doing?" He makes him get on the scales. Or is that after the girdle? I can't remember the order of it. But it's basically like he's gone. No, I'm in fine shape. Look at this. And he's got quite a flat stomach, but that's because he's got a girdle on. I don't know why, but just like that reveal was, and I kind of knew it was coming as well, not from memory. It was just the obvious way it was going.
Because he's like, take it off. He's like, no, I don't want you to see my naked body. Take it off.
No, it's my naked body. He says, and just all of that interaction between the 2 of them, I just think worked really well.
No, it did. Absolutely great picks, lads. Mine, it might seem the obvious one, but it's got to be the milkshake and snack bar gag near the beginning, the auto-destruct, just because it's one of those things like, you say you should have seen it coming, but I just didn't, and then when it gets revealed, the payoff was great. I love the whole setup of it, the whole way they go about it. It's just, like you said, one of the, like, a great standout Red Dwarf moment, and it's memorable. I know I'm going to remember that gag when you say, what were your favourite parts of Red Dwarf? That's one of them, so yeah, brilliant. Right, next segment we do, Billy, is our favourite character of an episode, which can be anyone, doesn't matter if they've had a line or they've still, like, they're the main one of the leads. So Who was your favourite character in this episode?
It's not Rimmer, is it? It's probably it's probably the cat. And I know it's one of those things, you know, the joke has always been the cat has never had an episode to himself. Until you get to the promised land, sort of, and even then, well, you'll see. But it's kind of, he's never had one dedicated to himself, and that's because he doesn't need it. Like, Danny will just steal the show every time he's on screen, and to me, he's always the standout performer. I've never seen Danny pull in, you know, a half-assed performance. And, you know, as we were kind of saying, Craig isn't really on the top of his game. I think Chris is struggling as well, to be honest. Robert is, you know, it's Crichton's early days, so he's kind of not anywhere near the plot. And neither's Holly, so Hattie doesn't have much to do. So for me, it has to be Danny as the cat as my standout character.
Oh, that's fab. That's brilliant. That's great to hear as well, because I know me and Phil have said one thing we've talked about is, especially in these early episodes, we feel the cat doesn't have much to do in the plot, and sometimes he feels completely sidelined. Particularly in series 1 and 2. It was he kind of felt a bit like an extra in
he's
series 1
kind
and 2.
of doing his own thing on Red Dwarf, and he occasionally bumps into them. Whereas when they start to actually form a sitcom, and you know they have to go out in Starbug, he's always with them. They're just like inseparable at that point.
Yeah, no, it's great. Well, Phil, what about you? Who is your favourite?
I've actually gone because, like we said earlier, there's a bit of a low energy to most of the cut, especially Chris and Craig. Quite a low energy to them this week. I've actually given it to Holly, and the reason is mainly because of the context of what we've seen of Holly so far. This new version of Holly. I've said it in a few episodes now that it's felt like in every episode up to this point where Holly has had lines, it has been sort of almost painfully obvious that those lines were written for Norman Lovett, and that her take on them, because they were written for him, it just doesn't quite work as well. And I don't know if these lines were, but they'd reached the point in the scripting process where they knew they didn't have Norman anymore, and therefore they were working to her strengths, or it was just coincidence. But it just seemed to work so much better than we've had in the last 4 episodes of her. That it sort of works with her comic timing. So just because in comparison to the rest of it, it really stood out to me. I was like, oh, excellent. We're getting a decent Hattie performance as Holly now. It feels like her.
Yeah, I think she's changed tact because she's not doing that kind of passive. Because I can hear Norman doing that. You know, we could stand here and get blown up. He's, you know, doing that kind of thing. I can hear him being a lot more passive and kind of joking along with them. Whereas, like, Hattie is like, no, we've got some choices here. Well, we stand here and get blown up. We sit down here and get blown up. We all get blown up. You having a go at me. And it's like she's kind of butting up against them and arguing with them for the first time. And I think that is more of a dynamic you see with Hattie going forward as Holly. She certainly can give it back to them. That kind of sass and the kind of ignorance and arrogance. So I totally see that, Phil,
Yeah, what about you, Adam? Who is your favourite character?
It was tough for me because I think from like an acting perspective, like we mentioned about the mimicry, and as I think you said, Billy, near the beginning, I mean, Chris Barry is a very strong mimic. Just as an actor myself, I really respected the craft he has and obviously the work he put in. But like has been addressed by the pair of you, like the 2 leads aren't necessarily on the top of their game this time, or it doesn't feel that way. And then just Rimmer's character decisions really just put me off. So I was like, I love you, Chris, but I can't do it. I'm going to go with you, Billy. It was the cat for me, which is really lovely because I don't think I've said the cat before so far. For the reasons I said, you know, we feel like he's sort of sidelined a bit. He's just sort of there. But he was the one who, like I said, who had the most energy, who had some of the best jokes. So yeah, I'm going to go with you and join it with the cat. So good on Danny John Jules. There he is. I've finally given him a favourite cat. It's only taken me, like 16 episodes? And the last thing we tend to do each week is we rate an episode out of 10 scutters. How many scutters out of 10? So, Billy, as our guest, how many scutters would you give Bodyswap out of 10?
Do you know what? Like, there are some episodes of the show that I know people really don't like. And so with Red Dwarf, for me, I always try to keep it at a 5 or above because it is one of my, you know, it's my favourite other TV show. And so for all its faults, You know, there are things to enjoy in Series 7. There's things to enjoy in Series 8. But I think this is probably the story in this era of Red Dwarf, sort of during the peak of its run, that I like the least. There are a couple of episodes here and there that I'm not as fond of, or I usually skip when I'm kind of marathoning them or whatever. But do you know what? Like, I think this might be one of my least favourite episodes of Red Dwarf. I just
That's
think
fair.
that because it is based on the comedy and it's based on that energy with the audience, and it's not there, it just is missing something for me that other episodes of Red Dwarf aren't missing.
Sure.
Even in later seasons like 7, when they get rid of the audience completely and it's shot more like a drama, like a film, there's at least something different going on there, so you can kind of forgive it if it feels a bit different. But you know, there are certain, you know, mitigating circumstances that meant this couldn't be shot in front of an audience because of the technical things, but I just thought it just didn't have the energy for me, so I have to put it down as sort of like maybe a 2 or 3 8 scutters. There's good moments, but I'd say
Wow.
maybe 3. I'd say a 3.
Wowee.
Okay.
That, I think, is our lowest score ever.
That is our
out
lowest
of
score
anyone.
ever.
I don't mean to come in here and be like
No,
a
I mean-
killjoy, but it's just
No,
Yeah.
it's fair, man. You got to stay true to. I mean, who knows? We might do it similarly. I mean, Phil, what?
Do you know
are
what?
your
Sorry, Phil. I
go
feel
for it,
really,
go for
I feel really bad. I feel like I've
No,
got it
no,
on
no.
a downer.
It's just an
But-
observation. You go for 3 if you want.
But do
man,
you
that's
know
fine.
what? Like, but there are episodes. But Series 8 exists. Like Part 1 and Part 2 exist, and Crying TV exists. So this has got to be like a 4. I'll give it a
Oh
4.
boy.
You give it a 4. Okay. I'm going to give it a 5. And which is also my lowest score so far
Wow,
that I've given an
wow,
episode,
wow.
because it, for many of the same reasons as I think that you gave it so low, it just doesn't have, it lacks energy. The comedy doesn't always quite work because of the lack of energy, I think is part of the cause of it. It also felt slightly like it was of a different era, because it felt like an episode in terms of structure from series 1 or 2. In terms of the plot and the structure, it felt like it would fit more in there as well than it does in this sort of era of the more high action type thing that they've started to move towards. So yeah, I think it's my lowest score as well. It's slightly above what you gave it there, with a 5. Are you gonna redeem it, Adam, or is it gonna be our?
I feel like
All
Adam
round.
was quite shocked by my score. I feel like maybe Adam, you
No.
enjoyed it the most out of us.
No,
Or...
only because, as I say, I think we've enjoyed it or we've been generous. Me and Phil have always, I'd say we usually go for like 7 and above. I think I gave one
Right.
6. I can't remember what that was to, but I
I think
remember giving a
6 or 6.5 was my
6.5,
lowest before
yeah.
this.
Right.
I'm gonna settle, because honestly, between the middle of you, I'm gonna go 4.5, just because. Like we've said, there are some really great jokes in there and gags, like all of our funniest moments, for example. But I just think like you need. It seems weird saying you need more than just a few jokes to make a sitcom funny, but to make it funny throughout the whole thing, do you know what I mean? It felt like more, oh, that was some good jokes, but the whole thing, you know, and just as I've said, like Rimmer's. I get Rimmer's reasoning, but the way it's portrayed is just really dodgy and a bit weird, and I don't like it. I mean, it's probably obvious, but I just think there were probably better ways you could have executed that motive without making him seem really like reprehensible about it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. It's one episode I probably wouldn't watch it again in full. Maybe for those moments, like if it was like funniest gags compilation, like the milkshake gag, I'd do that. But I don't think I'd want to watch this one again. So yeah, I'm gonna go 4.5.
Is that
which
what
is also
the
mine.
0.5 is for? The 0.5 is for the milkshake gag.
Just
that-
for the
that
milkshake
alone.
gag, yeah.
But you know what's funny though? It's like all the funniest moments pretty much are totally disconnected from the Bodyswap plot.
Well,
and it's
that's-
kind of like they've stretched the idea quite thin, really, haven't they? It's like they've had the idea for the opening scene. It makes a great pre-credit sequence sort of gag, but then when we move on, kind of beyond that, it's like, well, what more can we do with this concept? It's kind of loose, you know. The jokes are loosely attached to the conceit going through it, you know.
Absolutely. So, well, that just goes to show, isn't it? They were jokes that could have belonged in better episodes,
they
something
could have.
like that. But okay, well, 4.5, and 5 are all of our lowest scores on the podcast so far. Will it be Will it go down further in the what I'm guessing is the infamous Series 7 and 8 from what I'm hearing? You'll find out when we get there.
I maintain that Series 7 isn't that bad. Series 8 is a different matter.
Yeah, Series, okay, I'd agree, yeah, Series 7 is better. It has more
What I'm
redeeming qualities.
feeling right now must be what fans of, like, Doctor Who, but who maybe don't know, like, all the classic ones. You go, oh, Season 7's the best season, Season 16's not very good, and they're like, what are they talking about? This is what I'm feeling right now. I'm like, oh, well, Season 8 must be really bad of Red Dwarf, but... You watch, we're going to get to it, Phil, and I'll be like, this is the greatest series of all time. But...
I think I should come back for one of those Series 8 ones.
Oh, please do.
Yes.
I'd love to. That would be so fun
do.
just to see, because also like, I'm joining you sort of part way on this journey, Adam, as well. So it'd be interesting once you've seen it all through and maybe gone back and watched the odd episode because you liked it, to see you get to Series 8 or something, you know, when maybe like the opening two-parter, like it would be really interesting to see that change, you know.
We are going all the way to the Promised Land as well.
We are.
So we do also have to, at some point, tackle Back to Earth.
True. Wow. Yeah. Do you know?
I've heard about Back to Earth.
I won't give like too much away, but I watched it not long ago. Sorry, Adam, this is going completely off piste, but I watched it not long ago, and the director's cut of it is way better than the 3-part version. It's much better to watch it as a director's cut, as a full movie, as it was intended, I think, rather than chopped up into 3 bits.
Okay.
All right. Well, there we go, Phil. We've got to watch the director's cut.
Clearly.
Well, folks, that brings us to the end of another episode of Everybody's Dead Dave. We do hope you enjoyed it. Billy, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you as our guest this week.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you. No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, guys. It was nice to come on and talk about Red Dwarf with you.
Yeah, and we'll have you on again. Don't you worry. We're going to have you back. But before you do go, if there's any of your socials you want to shout out, where can people find you, or any projects you're working on?
So Twitter, you can find me at Garret-John, GarretTTJOHN, and you can also, I do stuff on Pharos Features, so I've got some other kind of audio projects coming up there. That's just about it for me.
Awesome, man, awesome. And Phil, what about yourself? Where can the lovely people find you?
Well, if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or one of the many other podcast platforms, you can also watch a squiggly line that is a waveform on my YouTube channel while we speak, and some nice little hand-drawn depictions of me and Adam, drawn by the lovely Sophie Isles as well. So you can check all that out, and a lot of Doctor Who content and other pop culture content, Star Trek, MCU. I do a lot of stuff on anything geeky that I like, really, over on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Philip Hawkins, Philip with 1 L. Nice and easy to find.
There you go. And for myself, it's also just my name, Adam Martyn with the Y. Type that in on YouTube, I should pop up. On Twitter, Adam Martyn AMTV, you should find me there. Just for my daily ramblings, which is often what I do. I'm like Phil, talk about a lot of pop culture stuff, mainly Doctor Who, but other things as well. And yeah, that's me. So, all that's left to be said, Billy, thank you once again for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
And Phil, that's another one in the can on our long, illustrious journey through
Indeed.
Red Dwarf. And listeners, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.